Hello everyone, so this is going to be the text for the Unit 1 Activity 3 assignment on enlistment practices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through the different segments so that way you can follow along. So the first one is for Indigenous peoples. When Indigenous men volunteered for service, they faced both racism and language barriers. Some Canadian government officials were concerned that Indigenous soldiers would be considered savages and mistreated by German soldiers if taken prisoner. Indigenous recruits were often given positions as snipers and scouts. Military leaders stereotyped the Indigenous soldiers as skilled hunters and warriors who had good observation skills with excellent stamina, courage, and fit for survival under extreme conditions. As a result, they were often given the most dangerous jobs. Japanese Canadian soldiers. At the beginning of World War I, a number of Japanese immigrants in Vancouver tried to enlist in the Canadian Expeditionary Forces. At the time, they were not allowed to become citizens, but they wanted to enlist to demonstrate their loyalty to Canada. The government of British Columbia refused to accept them because of the prejudicial attitudes against Asian people at that time. In spite of this discrimination, several hundred Japanese Canadians from British Columbia traveled to Calgary, Alberta, where they were permitted to enlist. A Japanese Canadian soldier poses in this photo in his souvenir cap taken from the enemy. Most visible minority Canadians were barred from military service until 1916, when voluntary recruitment dropped to dangerously low levels. Despite their initial rejection, many visible minority Canadians now enlisted, including 222 Japanese Canadians, of whom 54 were killed and 92 wounded in battle. For Chinese and Chinese Canadians, the northern government of China joined the First World War in 1917 in support of the Allies. Chinese laborers were recruited and transported across Canada to the battlegrounds in Europe. 84,000 members of the Chinese Labor Corps crossed Canada en route to France, where they laid tracks for railways, repaired roads, loaded cargo, and cleaned up the battlefields. In 1919, when nearly 50,000 of these workers traveled home, their railway carriages were sealed so that they could not escape and try to settle in Canada. During the war, many Chinese Canadians helped support the Canadian war effort by purchasing bonds, and some enlisted for service. However, British Columbia, the province of residence of most Chinese Canadians, did not accept volunteers of Chinese origin into the military, meaning that they had to sign up in other provinces. No clear figure exists for the number of Chinese Canadians who served in the First World War. Some historians suggest that up to 300 individuals may have volunteered. For African Canadian soldiers, many Black Canadians attempted to enlist in the Canadian Expeditionary Force in 1916. However, they faced challenges as the military leaders at that time were hesitant to allow minorities to join the forces. As Major General W. Watkin, Chief of the General Staff, declared in 1916, not a single commanding officer in Military District Number 2 is willing to accept a colored platoon as part of his battalion. Despite the resistance, the Number 2 Construction Battalion was formed on July 5, 1916, in Pictou, Nova Scotia. Black citizens from across Canada were allowed to enlist in the platoon, which would have jobs such as cutting lumber for trench reinforcement, building ditches, and railways.